Today's episode of the Counselling Tutor Podcast is sponsored by Web Healer. You're a counsellor in private practice and you need a website, or you've got an existing website which you need help with. Web Healer are offering Counselling Tutor Podcast listeners, that's you, £100 off the cost of a website design and build. Now, Web Healers specialise in websites for counsellors and psychotherapists. It's what they do. And the Web Healer team provide a completely non-technical, done-for-you solution, leaving you to focus your time on your clients. Operating for 20 years, Web Healer are a trusted resource amongst counsellors when it comes to getting your practice online. So get the package details and claim your £100 off coupon for your new website by going to counsellingtutor.com/website. That's counsellingtutor.com/website.
Welcome to the Counselling Tutor Podcast, the must-listen-to podcast for students of counselling and psychotherapy. Here are your hosts, Rory Lees-Oakes and Ken Kelly.
Hi, I'm Rory, and with me, as always, is Ken. How are you doing, Ken?
Exceptionally well, Rory. Thank you so much for asking. And Rory and I both hope that you are well. You've joined us for the Counselling Tutor Podcast. You've caught us at episode 246. 3 stops on today's journey, starting off with theory and practice, where we take an element of theory and look at how that shows in the day-to-day practice of being a counsellor or psychotherapist. And today we're going to be looking at Petruska Clarkson's 5 relationship model. Excuse my pronunciation there, tripping over my tongue this morning. We then move on to practice partner, where we recognize that so many of us either full-time have a private practice that we run, or part-time we have a private practice we run, and we look at different elements of running, building, starting a private practice. And today we're looking at paid advertising. How can we generate inquiries by paying for that, and what does that look like? What are the different avenues available to us? And then we move on to practice matters, where we look at an element of practice, something that may show up in our therapy room that we will see. And today we have an interview with Dr. Dwight Turner. You met up with him, Rory, to speak about working with otherness. It's a really big topic. I like the wording of that, working with otherness. So that to come for you. But we're starting off with that theory in practice and Petruska Clarkson's 5 relationship model, Rory.
Yes, and the reason that I brought this is because our Facebook group, and if you're not a member of our Facebook group, go to Facebook, type in Counselling Tutor. You'll let you in and you'll see thousands of like-minded people all really talking about the world of counselling and psychotherapy. There's tutors, there's students, there's qualified practitioners, there's a soup song of supervisors in there, and it's a really great conversation. So come in, join the party, pose your questions and join this really strong, supportive community. And one of the questions that gets asked time and time again is the topic of what's called transpersonal psychotherapy. And the person who really coined the phrase and who really wrote the book on transpersonal psychotherapy is a person called Petruska Clarkson. She was from South Africa. She wrote a book called A Therapeutic Relationship, which stands up, her theories stand up in the pantheon of relational theories alongside Carl Rogers' 6 necessary and sufficient conditions. And her idea is a very, very, very simple one. There are 5 elements to forming and sustaining and maintaining a therapeutic relationship. And she called this the 5 relationship model. And they're sometimes called phases. And what she said is if these 5 things were in place and used and received by the client, the relationship would be sometimes referred to as low gravity. It's very unlikely to fall over or blow over if there's any kind of emotional winds around. And she starts off by talking about the working alliance. Everyone knows that right at the beginning of any therapeutic relationship, you make a contract. And the working alliance is about the contract, making sure that both parties fully understand what the contract is, the times that you turn up, the duration of the therapy, how long the therapy is for, I guess in paid work, how much the fee is, when the fee will be paid. So right at the beginning, there is clarity, absolute clarity. And then she goes on to talk about, and we don't talk about this very often on the Counselling Tutor podcast, transference and counter-transference. And I think this is a really important element of a therapeutic relationship, because sometimes we are reminded, our clients remind us of relationships from the past, or they may look like someone from the past. And that brings up feelings and thoughts from the past, which we can project onto someone brand new. If I was sitting in front of maybe someone who looked like my old head teacher, it would be wrong of me to think of that person as my old head teacher who I didn't like very much. This is someone brand new, nothing like the person in the past. But to be aware of that transference, and the counter-transference is, of course, how we react to that, how I'd react to someone who looked like my old head teacher or my old teacher. So being thoughtful of that and keeping that in our mind as we're working with a client. And then, quite radically, she talks about the reparative developmental model. And I know we've talked in the podcast quite often about the good enough other, the fact that the therapist provides a stabilizing, a solid base, sometimes referred to, as a solid base, or a consistent base. So the client can be themselves and act out in a way that allows them to grow. And sometimes we meet clients who may have not been able to act out kind of childish behaviors or have been repressed. And by being a solid kind of pseudo-parental figure, we allow that in the therapy room, that kind of love in the therapy room, to be able for the client to be themselves. She moves on to something called a person-to-person relationship. And what I like about this is this is very Rogerian. It's about congruence, it's about reality, it's about working as a genuine, real person within the relationship. And then finally, and this is the part I really love about this theory, the transpersonal relationship. And this is so hard to put into words, but recently I visited Ken and Colette in Wales, and we spent some time together. And for me, there was a real solid feeling of connection. It couldn't be something that was tangible or draw or write down, but that sense of knowing the other as a human being, of the values, of the understanding, of the connectedness. And that is the basis of the model. And the idea is that when we're working in therapy, we keep those in mind as different parts, because if one of them fails according to the theory, then the relationship may not be as stable. And I know there's a lot of people listening to this, Ken, who probably do person-centered therapy. But what I would do is I'd implore you to download the handout that comes with the podcast and have a look at it, because I think it's a good way of looking at relationships in general. And I think it does speak to personal development in a great way, Ken.
Absolutely, Rory. And this section that we have here, theory to practice. So there's the theory, beautifully outlined. Go and get that handout, and you'll get that by going to counsellingtutor.com. Click on the podcast tab right at the top of the page. Make your way to 246. That's today's episode, and you'll be able to get the theory handout. So you'll have the theory in front of you. But what we're looking at here is, how does this theory show itself within our therapy room? And as I was listening to the theory, Rory, and you beautifully describing that, I am mindful that yes, that this is a specific theory that we're looking at, but it relates so much to person-centered and other theories as well. So we start off with that working alliance. So if I look to transactional analysis, that's going to be covering a working alliance, the contracting, so important there. If I look to person-centered, you're going to be contracting. If you're a CBT practitioner, you're going to be contract. You're going to be outlining outlying what is available and what is on offer. So we can easily map that domain. Transferential. Again, we look to transactional analysis, where we're going to be working with transference and counter-transference there. And this transferential element is interesting because often the very nature of transference and counter-transference is that it can be invisible. I think it's about personal development, Rory. You know, it's noticing what's going on within self. So you have a client, the client is presenting, they're saying something, and you're feeling a low level of irritation towards this client, you know, and we can easily just brush that away and let me just focus in on this client. But if we take note of that may be something that is transferential, and it's something that, of course, that we can take into our supervision if we're experiencing that transferential or counter-transference within the relationship. The reparative development needed relationship. This is, I really like it. It's that good enough other, as you say, Rory. And so often, you know, a client may have gone through life being let down by those closest, those that are supposedly there to support and love them. They can be let down by those people. And then you might see this showing itself in therapy, where they might say something, you know, like, you know, nobody's ever listened to me like this before. And that's being that good enough other. There you are seeing that in action within your therapy room. We show up as therapists professionally for the benefit of that client, and that's a rare and precious type of relationship. And sometimes the client may look at that as being an element of stability within their life. It can be an example of how people can be and can show up, and it may contradict what they feel. You know, all people are just out for themselves. All people don't care about me. But within therapy, we get to be that significant other. I think that's a really important factor, and it's almost a parenting or reparenting side within it. The person-to-person relationship I love, because this just goes into what the research shows us, is that no matter what modality of therapy you are practicing, that relationship, that person-to-person, human-to-human relationship is what really counts. One human being there in service of the other, without judgment, unconditionally being there, listening to this person in a threat-free environment, excuse me, so rare. And of course, probably the most important part of what we're doing there. And then the transpersonal relationship, Rory, as you said, it's an interesting one, isn't it? That's almost spiritual in nature. It's that feeling that you get. And what's interesting here when we speak about this is that towards the end of Carl Rogers's work, he started speaking about that more spiritual element of counseling, something that can't really be explained in words. And if you've been a practicing counselor or psychotherapist for some time, you'll have seen this. You'll have seen it in a client where they almost get a new lease, a realization which changes who they are and how they choose to go forward. It is incredibly powerful and very difficult to explain. Very often we can do very little and then still see this happening because it happens from the client's side, and it is because of the relationship. And I think just using this as a theory, being able to map where we are, no matter what our modality is to this, just gives us an interesting pegboard, as it were, Rory, to put the peg in. So where is this client with me? Where are we at in this relationship?
Yes, I mean, it's a distinct model from the person-centered model. But I would pick up on the transferential and counter-transferential in terms of in practice, or the theory to practice. You know, you may get a client who says, you remind me of, and then whoever that is. And it's really important that if that happens, I've had that happen, you know, with female clients, that you remind me of someone who was abusive to me in the past, because I was male, maybe because I had dark hair or my build or even the inflection in my voice. And it's really important that you rework that transference in the here and now. If that happens, you know, my response to that would be, I really hear that I look or sound or whatever it is that makes you feel the feelings that you had of that other person, but I'm not that person. I am not that person that the feelings that you're in have. And that starts off a conversation about not everybody's the same. And also it pegs in the ground the fact that those feelings are from a past relationship, not from this relationship, although understandable. And in terms of the reparative developmentally needed relationship, that can be as simple as normalizing something. How many times have we, as therapists, listened to clients who've said, well, when this happened, I froze and I wish I'd have ran away, or I wish I'd put a fight up. And as a therapist will say, well, actually that, freezing is what majority of people do. That's how our mind reacts when we're using a little bit of trauma-informed information. We say that's quite normal, in inverted commas, for humans to do that. And the relief that people can have just to think, well, it's not just me, it's someone else. And that's, I guess, what a parent would do. They would say, well, okay, to a child who didn't have that information, and I'm not saying clients are children by any stretch of the imagination. However, it is about giving information and giving that stability. And, the person-to-person relationship is, as you said, the most important part. Building that relationship, seeing that person as an individual in their own right, and being curious, being, there and listening and trying to enter the frame of reference. And I guess the one that is an interesting one for me is the transpersonal relationship, this spiritual, and that's what comes up in supervision. A good supervisor would say, how do you feel about this client? And and it's at that point, it's very telling about how the relationship is forming and sustaining. So I have a supervisor who says to me, I really don't like this client. Then we go into an explanation of what's going on, and that might take us back to the transfers, counter-transfers. So it's a useful model, and it's a model that I think you can map to personal development very, very, very easily, because it's a good way of sustaining relationships. And I'll let you into a little secret. I try to use this model where I can. Not perfect, doesn't always work, but I found it very, very, very helpful. Very helpful in certainly combating my slightly avoidant attachment style.
Yes.
It's a good structure to be able to refer to when things become a little uncomfortable or difficult in a relationship, Ken.
Very much so. And I think the key word there is relationship. So this is not just about therapy. Of course, that's what it was developed. But if you're a supervisor, anywhere where you're looking to build a relationship, there's elements of this that come into play. It's definitely worth downloading the handout. Get yourself over to counsellingtutor.com, click on the podcast tab, make your way to episode 246. Go and get Rory's super duper handout, a Petruska Clarkson 5 relationship model. Oh, I wish I could say it as well as you do, Rory. I definitely trip over the names, I really do. But that's me. Theory to Practice is proudly sponsored by CounsellingSkillsAcademy.com. I'm Ken Kelly, and I've got a real burning passion for counselling skills. I've built training that takes the doubt out of using counselling skills. You get to see the counselling skills used in real live sessions by a qualified therapist. Full sessions, real material, real counselling skills. To find out more, go to CounsellingSkillsAcademy.com. Practice partner now, we're moving away from theory in practice into practice partner, where we recognize that specifically in today's day and age, more and more practitioners are turning to private practice, either part-time in private practice or full-time, or building a private practice over the years. And we like to touch on little elements of this because we know it's important to you. And today, the topic we're going to look at is paid for advertising, Rory. We spoke about websites. We spoke about having traffic to your website. You can have a website, but without people visiting your website or seeing your directory listing or whatever it may be, they don't know you really exist. and paid advertising is a way to get some eyes on your website, or to get some people to take the call to action to get in contact with you. And I've kind of made a short list, Rory, of directory listings, which you can kick us off with. We're then going to go on and pair that up with ethical body listings, and then we're going to go to pay-per-click advertising, which I'll jump into. Do you want to kick us off on those directories and ethical body and private directories? Yeah.
Yes. So when we're thinking of anything in our counselling practices, it's about putting yourself in the client's shoes. Thinking of the client's journey, and the client is distressed, looking to alleviate that distress or talk to somebody. What do they do? Where do they go? And what they will probably do is type in therapy or counselling into a search engine on the internet. They may ask friends for recommendations, but generally speaking, most people just jump on the internet, type counselling, and what comes up in the search engines dictates what people will click on and look at. And one of the things that's been incredibly successful over recent years is counselling directories, such as ones operated by ethical bodies or independent organisations, where you can list yourself, usually a picture, usually your experience, your location. Do you work online, or do you work just face-to-face? Do you offer supervision? And you would pay to have your profile put on to a page, and people could view you, and then they could click and send you an email, or you may have a phone number, phone or text, and they can get hold of you. And at that point, you can then talk with the clients and, see if you're a good fit for them. And I've talked about independent organisations such as directory listings, but also growing now, ethical bodies have their own listings. So, a lot of clients may very well recognise the names of ethical bodies and put in counselling and the name of the ethical body, and that would come up, and that would come up on the top of the search results, and you go in and you can advertise there. So there's lots of different listings, and there's lots of different ways of promoting yourself on those listings, Ken.
There is indeed, Rory, and this is all about paid advertising. So with My Ethical Body, I'm a member of My Ethical Body, and I pay my annual subscription, but that does not give me a place in the directory. To go into the directory, I have to pay a little bit more. And it's about you thinking about, is that worth it for you? I mean, we've spoken about the advantages and disadvantages of the directory sites before in previous episodes, and just in brief, that the benefits are that it will probably come up high on the search results, as you've already said, Rory. One of the disadvantages is you might be there with 100, 200, 1,000 other therapists that are also listed there. So, but that is an area, and of course, I think we don't need to speak too much more about that because it's pretty self-explanatory. What I did want to go into is other ways of paying to advertise your services. And one of them that is very popular is Google PPC. And PPC stands for pay per click. So pay per click is an advertising model that suggests that you create an advert and that you only pay if somebody clicks on the advert and therefore visits your website. So that is when the cost is incurred, and that is why it's called pay per click. So you're really paying to have traffic to your website. So it's if we're talking about Google pay per click, some of the advantage of this is it is a user generated search. In other words, as you said, Rory, thinking of the client's journey, the prospective client's journey, maybe somebody is struggling with something in their life. Maybe they go online and they put into a search engine, help with depression or something like that. They're putting in a specific word and they are searching, and you can have an advert trigger when that word is put in. So that is how it actually works. Now, if you go to Google yourself and put in a search for counselor near me, and I challenge you to go and do this. Go on Google, put in counselor near me and hit return and have a look at what comes up. And you'll see right at the top, those that are listed right at the top, if you look on the left-hand side, in very small writing, you'll see the word AD, meaning ad. So in other words, those top searches, they are adverts that Google puts there, and that is how they monetize their search platform, by pushing people who pay more higher up. And just I was looking at some research on where the clicks come in, Rory. If you are in position number 1 when that search is put in, you get 43.32% of the clicks. So 43% of people will click on that top ad. Second one is 37.36%. The third one down is 29%, and the fourth one down is 19%. So you can see how being higher, paying more, because that's the model, and I'll go into that in a moment, how it actually works. Paying more puts you higher up, and you therefore should get more traffic from that. It is keyword generated, meaning you get to say, I want it to trigger when somebody puts in counselor and maybe your area. So if I was in Warrington, I'd say counselor in Warrington, I want my advert to show. So you would say what the parameters are. They're called keywords that would trigger your ad. So there's the advantage, is that you can get seen. The advantage is it's pretty instant. So if you start an ads campaign and you pay your money, you're going to be there straight away pretty much. As soon as that's been set up, you'll start showing. So disadvantages of this Google pay-per-click advertising is you're competing against other businesses. That may be other therapists, but it may also be businesses related to counselling and psychotherapy. You mentioned, Rory, the directories. So yes, we do have ethical body directories, but there are also some private directories that just specialize in coming high in Google for counselors. And that may be a counseling directory or a directory suited towards your niche. And they may be using Google pay-per-click advertising. In fact, that challenge that I gave you of counseling near me, I can almost bet you, and I don't do that a lot, Rory. I don't bet a lot. That when it returns its results, you're going to see a directory listed up there with ad next to it. Now, we would imagine that a directory maybe has hundreds, if not thousands, of therapists that are paying an annual fee, so they've got a big budget or a bigger budget than maybe an individual practitioner. Therefore, they can maybe pay a little bit more for an advert, which means they can outrank an individual practitioner. So competing with businesses that have bigger budget, such as directories or therapist client pairing apps. There's a big move at the moment for these apps. I'm not going to mention any names, but there's a few of them out there that will pair a therapist and a client together, and they usually target clients, and then they target the therapist separately and get them to it's like a listing, but it's, I guess, a little bit more sophisticated, and they also advertise on Google. And you also are competing against businesses who employ paid media agencies. So when the big businesses have got quite a bit of budget, they usually get specialist agencies to run their pay-per-click adverts for them. And the agencies obviously really know how to optimize those ads, and it can be quite a learning curve for us as individuals going in. Of course, we can go to an agency to run our ads for us, but they usually charge us a fee, and it's usually a percentage of spend that you need to put in on that. You can also burn through your budget pretty quickly with these pay-per-click adverts if you're not tracking, if it's not optimized well, and it needs really careful tracking to be effective. It is effective. It's very effective if you run it properly. Google does have free training on how to use their PPC adverts. There are many therapists that are getting good business through using pay-per-click adverts. And what I like about it, Rory, is that it is what's called non-disruptive. So disruptive is I'm on Facebook and an advert comes up and wants to pull me away from Facebook to show me something or sell me something. That's disruptive. I was busy just scrolling through Facebook. But if I go on Google and I type in a search and I get a result, that is not invasive. I'm actually asking. So that, I guess, is pay-per-click advertising, Rory.
Yeah, and I think I'll pick up on the difference between invasive and non-invasive advertising, because I'm sure I'm not different to many other people who get maybe a little miffed when I'm scrolling through something, or even if I'm watching the TV and it's adverts have come on, because I'm being sold something I may not want. It's a passive thing, isn't it? And I saw an advert the other day for children's rusks. I have no need at 64 for children's rusks, I can assure you.
They know you drink the tea, Rory. They're thinking about dipping it in the tea, I'm sure.
Oh, that's purely for Garibaldi's. There are rules, Ken. And what's really interesting, of course, is it's a scattergun approach. They advertise to millions of people in the hope that the audience that they're after will be watching it. With non-disruptive or pay-per-click advertising, people are searching it. It's put in front of you, and I think there's something to be said for that. In that people will say, well, that's how a business may operate. A business may advertise themselves, but not kind of pester me. I don't know about you, Ken, but I don't like being pestered, as we say in North of England.
So that is Google PPC. And I'm going to speak about Facebook, because Facebook, it is a disruptive advertisement. However, it can be effective as well. So I think it's worth speaking about Facebook. And of course, other social media platforms apply here. I'm just using these as examples. And of course, there are other search engines that also do paid advertising. So Facebook is a bit trickier to use for advertising, specifically for counseling or psychotherapy. And the reason for that is that the way that the Facebook algorithm works is it targets demographics. So it will target a certain age group, a gender, and it will target people based on websites that they visit externally to Facebook as well. So there's a lot of tracking involved, and it can be done. But you might be better off advertising something like CPD. If you offer, we've spoken about portfolio careers. If you offer CPD, then targeting on Facebook and saying, I want to target counselors who work with grief, for example. The algorithm's really good for that. And then you might come up on somebody's timeline saying, hey, extended grief CPD workshop or whatever it may be, click here. And then it makes sense because it's targeting a demographic. But it's difficult to reach a demographic of a client who may be struggling or in a difficult situation, because how is Facebook determining that? And the ethics of it just make me a little bit, I don't know how it works. It all happens behind the magic curtain with information that may be stored outside of your jurisdiction and the data protection laws that apply to you within your country or where you're based. The advantage of using social media advertising, example Facebook, is that it is a very smart algorithm. It can target specific behaviors. The question then is the ethics and how that is happening. Are they tracking somebody that is in distress that might be looking for help and then putting an advert in front of them? Is that right? That's for you to answer. But if managed well, the cost per click on Facebook can give you what's called a return on investment. In other words, it can be a profitable venture. Disadvantages of Facebook. More providers are blocking tracking. So I think Apple with their Apple phones were the first to kind of block the tracking. And more we're seeing a blocking of tracking, people understanding that their privacy and their data is a currency that's being bought and sold as a commodity. And more we're becoming savvy and we're not wanting our data to be tracked. And that is making social media advertising and these algorithms less effective. The CPA, or the cost per acquisition as it is known, can be high. So you could be paying £40 to £100, I'm speaking in UK currency now, for a single client, meaning that you would have to have sales based on the back of that. So the client would need to come for multiple sessions to make it break even or to run a profit. So it can be quite expensive just to land the client in the first place. It is complex to manage and track accurately. Again, it's like Google pay-per-click. You can burn through your budget very, very quickly and see little to no results and wonder why. It's not like keywords where I want to show for counseling near me. I want to show for help with depression. I want to help with grief. You can target what you're doing with those keywords in something like Google pay-per-click. With social media advertising, specifically something like Facebook, you're in the dark of who that is being targeted and how they are being targeted. It's all happening behind the scenes, so you don't have any control over that, which I think is a disadvantage. And I think this is important. The success of any pay-per-click, so whether you Google pay-per-click or Facebook, at the end of the day, somebody's on the internet, they're clicking on either your advert or your pop-up or whatever comes up, and they're going to your website. So if your website does not convert well, so if somebody goes to your website, looks and goes, nah, actually that doesn't feel like it fits for me, and they go away, you've paid for that click. You've paid for it. So you want a high converting web page. So you want a web page that when the person gets there, they go, yes, this person feels like a fit for me. And of course, you're not going to convert every single click that comes through to your site, but there are ways of optimizing what you have on the page that they click through to. And we've spoken about that already in previous episodes where we speak about the messaging that you may put out, speaking from the client's frame of reference, not boasting about your qualifications, but more like recognizing where they may have come in for. So an example of that, if I put in help with depression into Google and an advert comes up that I'm struggling with depression, counseling for depression, I click on that and I come through to a website, I would want that website to continue that conversation, saying something like, if you're struggling with depression, it can be like this, and I recognize it can be like that and like this, and I've been working with depression for some time. So we would want a continuity in the conversation for that to be effective. How it works, you set a daily, weekly or monthly budget on both PPC and social media advertising, and then you say how much you're willing to pay if you're on Google. And every time somebody clicks, you're paid. You are paying that, and you almost go into an auction type style where another practitioner might say, "Well, I'll pay 10 cents a click," and somebody else will say, "Well, I'll pay 50 cents a click," and someone else will say, "I'll pay I don't know, $1 a click," or whatever it may be, and you're bidding of what your maximum bid are. It can be effective, but it can also be, I guess, quite confusing. And then finally, I wanted to speak about print advertising in a local publication, and this can be effective. So here I live in North Wales, and we have a little paper that comes out once a month, and it gets delivered through our letterbox. And when I lived in Warrington, we had a little paper that would come through our letterbox once a month. It was free, and within there you'll have local news. The mayor did this, or whatever happened in the town that month, and they make their money from advertisers, local advertisers. And I often would look in the local paper if I was looking for a plumber or an electrician, someone who is local to come and if I had a job for them. So putting a print advert in a local news circular. So the advantages are it goes out locally. Now that is good if you're looking to work face-to-face in the room. So it's going to be targeted to your geographic location. It's another advantage is it is a fixed cost, Rory. So it's not like the pay-per-click where you might be burning through money, not knowing how much and where and how to set a cap on it. There's no direct link to your bank account. They say it's this much to pay an advert. You give them the money and the money is paid and the advert goes in, which is reassuring in some ways, I guess. If you do block bookings in these local circulars or newspapers or magazines, you can get editorial coverage. And what I mean by editorial coverage, you might say, if I take 3 months worth of adverts, will you let me write a half page about my service in the area? And you can speak about the people you help and the things that you deal with, and they would head it up. They're always looking for fillers to fill up interest stories, local counsellor, work specializing in blah, 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 whatever it may be. So it's worth asking if you do advertising with a local. Another advantage is it puts your repeating message in front of prospective clients regularly. And it may be that they only glance that you're a therapist and that you're in the area and maybe some of the things you work with, and that sits in the subconscious. But then they might be at work and somebody will say, oh, I'm really struggling with X, Y, Z. And they may go, I'm sure I saw isn't there a therapist in the blah, blah, blah directory. So with regular advertising, being in front of people all the time, you can kind of get that playing out there. That repeating message in front of people can be really powerful. And it can also establish you as a local expert or specialist. You know, the fact that you're local, the fact that you're there regularly, the fact that you might have editorials from time to time, that creates something called brand awareness. You know, the big companies spend a lot of money on brand awareness, being seen a lot, being spoken about a lot, and being in the eyes of the customers a lot. And that can establish you in the perception of the readers of that magazine as the local specialist. And I do remember, Rory, in one of the Warrington papers, we used to advertise a different business in there, but there was a hypnotherapist that had a monthly column, and he would do a little bit of a motivational thing and a call to action at the end. And he was a regular advertiser in the magazine and had done a deal to do this regular column. And I tell you something, I certainly perceived him as the expert in my area. You know, why go look anywhere else? It was there all the time. Some of the disadvantages of the print ad is it comes at a cost. If you are placing ads with any kind of publication, always ask for a better rate. That's the advice.
Never play the card rates, as they call it.
That's it. Yeah, when they say, how much this is going to cost me, they're going to give you a rate, and you say, okay, but you can do better than that. And sometimes going in late will get you a better rate. You know, if they say we publish on a Thursday, if you go in on a Wednesday and say, oh, come on, pop an advert in, if they've still got open space, chances are they may let that go. Here's all the sneaky tricks, Rory. They may let it go for less. And of course, if you book more months, you get a better rate as well. The placement of the advert may be poor and get few eyes. So if you look through those local mags, be mindful of where your advert shows up, specifically if you're advertising regularly. You know, if you feel that you're across from something that's very distracting, a big full color, full page, and you're on the left-hand side in a little block there, you might want to ask for a more preferential placement of your advert. And I think the final disadvantage I want to call for here, Rory, is that print to web conversions are low. So if you're on the website, if I'm on Google and I type something in and a website comes up, whether it's an advert or a organic listing, and I click on it and I'm going to go through there, I'm instantly on that website. I don't have to go anywhere else. I'm on the same medium. But if I'm reading a magazine or I'm reading a local circular, and then it asks me to go to http://www.idocounselingforyou.com/working with depression, it becomes a very difficult call to action. It really does. So what works well with print is having a telephone number, a dedicated phone. We spoke in our last episode, I think, about leaving a message on your phone if you're not there to pick that up. And there's just some thoughts on paid advertising. Any final thoughts on that, Rory?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's such a kind of mixed economy, advertising in general. Anybody who runs a business will know that it's a real mixed economy. And I think that it's really important that if you're running your own private practice, think about how much bang you're getting for your buck.
Yep.
So please measure results. So that is absolutely important. You know, have a spreadsheet, and when you get an inquiry, just ask, you know, where did you see me? And just mark it on your spreadsheet. And at the end of the month, you can see where your money's best spent. And then you can think about, well, I may be able to do some more advertising on that medium, or maybe mediums like it. So, don't spend money on advertising without having some form of measurement. It would be my plea. Yeah. I think it's a good indication for any time you spend some money. You need to get a bang for your buck. Yeah.
I like it. Well, it becomes more and more that way, Rory, as the I guess the situation we all find ourselves in is that money goes less far the further we go. You're 100% right. It's a serious consideration, paid advertising. Are you getting the ROI? That's what Rory's speaking about. It's the return on investment. If I put in £100 into advertising, how much comes out? And the best way to do that is to track it, as you're saying, when somebody comes in or inquires with you, ask them, how did you find me? And then kind of mark where that is. So that is today's episode of Practice Partner. In our next episode of Practice Partner, we're going to be covering building a referral network. So a free way of generating clients. So make sure you tune in for our next series on that. But now on to Practice Matters, Rory, where we look at an element of something that make crop up in practice. Wow. And today you did an interview, Rory, with Dr. Dwight Turner, working with otherness. And I believe there's also a lecture in the Counsellor CPD library and in our counselling study resource on this, because it is such a broad topic.
It's true, Ken. And equality and diversity is now becoming more and more talked about in the world of counselling and psychotherapy, as it is in society in general, and that only has to be a good thing. However, sometimes we forget that we are all diverse in our own ways, and otherness is about realizing that when we're working with people, they are different to us. They have a different phenomenological view of the world. And I caught up with Dr. Dwight Turner, who is becoming and is forming a solid following in terms of equality and diversity and working with otherness. He's done a lecture on working with otherness. As Ken said, it's in the Counsellor Study Resource Library for Students and the CPD Library for Qualified Practitioners. And this is what he had to say.
Practice Matters.
The National Counselling Society is proud to sponsor Practice Matters. National Counselling Society are really excited to have launched their Children and Young People Therapist Register for counsellors working with the younger age group. To find out more, visit nationalcounsellingsociety.org. nationalcounsellingsociety.org.
And we welcome Dr. Dwight Turner, who's produced a fantastic lecture for the Counsellor CPD Library on the subject of exploring the intersections of privilege and otherness. So, Dr. Dwight Turner, thank you so much for joining us again.
It's my absolute pleasure to be here. Thanks for bringing me back. So,
it is a pleasure. This, as I say, it's the second time we've interviewed you and we've met. So, I think it might be interesting to kind of talk about intersections. What are intersections?
Well, basically, it's a simplified way of trying to explain something which is quite, not necessarily complex, but something which is quite broad that we haven't really thought about. And actually what it means in this context is that we are not just one identity. I'm not just a man of colour, for example. I'm a man of colour, I'm heterosexual, I'm from a working class background, I'm the son of immigrants, and we all walk with different types of identity at any given moment in time, some that come and go over periods of time, some which we're born with and we may divest ourselves of later on in life. The problem with the intersections part is, as they cross over and as they give us certain levels of privilege and otherness, what may happen is that we might feel like we're an outsider, or we have certain benefits that we don't deserve, or we feel like we're an outsider and we don't want to be an outsider. And these intersections are ways of showing that they cross over. We interact with our own sort of privilege and otherness all the time. So that's basically what intersections is. It comes from an old, not an old phrase at all, really, but it comes from the work of Kimberly Crenshaw and her ideas around intersectional theory, as well as Patricia Hills Collins and Audre Lorde, that sort of third wave of feminists, especially from the Black community of the States, who looked at actually The fact that women, for example, were not just disadvantaged as women, but could also be disadvantaged as women of colour, and how those two intersections then cross over to create a whole new need for understanding in the sort of legal frameworks of the United States. And it's similar to over here. So that's basically what it sort of talks to.
Yes, and I guess that leads on to this idea of otherness, that when we meet someone in the therapy room, that we might not be aware of that intersection that they have. When we meet someone, we're meeting another. And I think the interesting thing about otherness is that a lot of people may take the view it's about maybe sexuality or skin colour, but otherness is a wide panoply of difference, isn't it?
Totally agree. Yeah, it's a wide panoply of difference. I love that phrase, because it is. We all walk with a sense of otherness. We've all experienced being marginalised as an outsider. I think because we're so conditioned to look at, especially in the United Kingdom, the 9 protected characteristics of the Equalities Act 2010, which is relevant and is important. What we don't tend to explore is actually some of us sit with other forms of otherness which might sit outside of those 9 characteristics. The easiest example, if you like, is children form different groups, in-groups and out-groups, from a very early age. It's their way of trying to understand who they are, and I've talked about that on some of the slides. Now, children don't marginalise based around the protected characteristics. What they do is actually work out who they are and who they are not, and keep going through that process over and over again. And we also do it as adults. So when we encounter the other in the therapy room, you're quite right. We may not know what their experience of being marginalised, what their experience of being marginalised might be, but it will be there. It's a part of their intersectional identity, a holistic view of who they are.
Yeah, and I think you make a really, really interesting point. I think sometimes when we look at the Equalities Act, and I'm speaking about legislation that's in the United Kingdom here for international listeners, it sets out 9 protected characteristics. And I think it's easy just to see someone in a very narrow band of that characteristic and not realise that they may fit into another characteristic, and also define them just in one dimension.
I totally agree. And that can even go, because there are even characteristics within characteristics. Neurodiversity, for example, is a massive area. Disability is a massive area in itself. And there are visible and invisible disabilities. So why, the fact we try and remain within these structures, it's easy or easier, but us as therapists and counsellors and so on, and psychologists and psychiatrists, we're challenged working with a lot more complexity. And what intersectional theory actually does, it offers a language and a way of understanding the complex nature of human beings. We're not just 1 or 2 characteristics or identities. We're way more complex than that.
Yes, and I having looked at the slides of the presentation, one of the things that really struck with me is that you quote the I, thou, I, it idea from Martin Buber, who was a very famous philosopher and one to whom lots of therapists drew inspiration from. Just say a little bit about the I this and the I thou, because I think it's so significant when working with otherness.
I totally agree. And it's played a big role in my sort of doctoral research many years ago now. One of the things to start off with, though, really, is one has to remember that Martin Buber's work came out of his own experience of being othered during the Second World War, and very much informed his ideas. And what he actually came up with was he made it fairly simple, and it's not as simple as this in some ways. The I-it relationship, which he talks about, involves actually the I, oneself, the subject, if we want to go that sort of route, basically using the other for their own needs. So it's not an interpersonal relationship. It's one based upon one's own sort of requirements. Where you might see this in the modern day and age, objectification. The need of a man to therefore see the woman as an other, to play out a role based upon what they might want, what they might need. That makes sense. That's very different to an I-thou relationship, where there's more of a relationship, interpersonal. It's more about, okay, where are we going together on this journey to co-create something? And that's a very different space. And often as therapists in the therapeutic space, what we can do is we can build up, we can reside behind theories and ideas about how we view the other person, pathologizing, you might pathologize perhaps, or we don't mean to. That can be very much an I-it relationship, as opposed to perhaps a more person-centered or humanistic way of exploring the relationship, whereby I'm going with a sense of curiosity about who the other person is, whilst also realizing that I'm going to be changed by that experience. That makes sense. It changes the power dynamic based within that sort of environment.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, I think in any therapy, and indeed I think in any relationship, finding out who the other is and their uniqueness and their experience of what makes them them is the foundation of a relationship building. And I'm interested in the fact that you kind of blend Buber's work with Jung, who of course is well known for subconscious process or unconscious process. And what is the direction of bringing Jung in? We've talked about Buber, who's you're consciously othering somebody for your own needs and gratification, and there's no better example of that than being Jewish in Germany during the Second World War. But the unconscious process, what's happening there?
Well, it's a very good question in a way. Remember, Buber and Jung didn't really get along that well in their own interpersonal relationship. Buber felt that Jung spent too much time in the unconscious. But one of the things that Jungian psychology has given us is the idea, a couple of things in a way, that in that space of an I-it relationship, where we actually we reduce the other person down to a few core components, we other them or stereotype or objectify them in some way, their identity it doesn't just fall off the planet, it doesn't disappear. It gets pushed into the unconscious, from whereby it will bubble away and maybe come back to the surface in some other form, some other way, shape or form at some point. Now, where Jungian psychology takes us a stage further, if you like, is in recognizing, and in a great book that was written by Marie-Louise von France called Projection and Recollection, where she talks a bit about how whole groups can other groups, if you like, objectify, stereotype, whatever it might be, and therefore place their shadow material onto that other group. So they can't quite be authentically themselves. What they end up becoming is what we need them to be in order for us to start to feel some sort of semblance of perfection. That sort of narcissistic need to actually be seen as the good person. That might make sense. And I think what Marie-Louise von France also says is, for a culture to grow, a bit like the individual, for them to grow, that I-it has to become more of an I-thou. And in order for that to happen, the shadow other has to return home to its source, to us, ultimately.
Yes, and for those of you who may not be familiar with Jungian psychoanalytical theory, the idea, if I'm correct, and I'm not a scholar of Jung by any stretch of the imagination, is the shadow self is that kind of difficult part of our personality, the personality that we perhaps don't like to admit we have. And I know when I've done some training, I used to ask students, what makes you, what irritates you about others, and they would list a whole load of things, and I'd say, is that possible that that's actually what irritates you about yourself?
I mean, you're quite right. Yeah, that's the shadow is the other. Was one of the phrases that Jung came up with. And that's, you're right. If we're irritated by it, our egoic sense of self, our identity, is challenged by the mere presence of the other, in a way.
Yes. So as we come to the end of this interview, what do you hope that people will take away from this lecture? What do you hope that people may be able to take away personally and instill into their practices?
Well, I personally hope that people take away that there is a language here that we can all use as practitioners to understand, one, our own sense of otherness, because that's where this all starts. There is a sense of privilege. There's no shame attached to it. It's just part of who we are. But also how that might present itself in a therapeutic space, through dreams, through creative work, being able to actually work with the other and not be afraid to have difficult conversations about the social constructors of identity that will come into our spaces. We're therapists and counselors. We're professionals. So we often talk about some very difficult things. this otherness, diversity, is a part of that whole process. So that's what we can actually, this is what I hope that people will be able to take away from the presentation. And on a personal level, it really is just about bringing people together. The more we see the other, the more likelihood there is that actually we were able to interact and co-create a better environment for the work that we do together and the way we live as human beings. If we're not seeing the other, if we're not willing to see the other, then actually we're not a community at all.
Well, exploring the intersections of privilege and otherness is in the CPD library and available for you to watch. And as always, Dr. Dwight Turner, thank you so much for joining us.
Big thank you to Dr. Dwight Turner. Big thank you to you, Rory, for hosting that interview. And of course, if you would like to see the entire lecture of Dr. Dwight Turner, you can get that if you're a qualified practitioner by logging into the Counselor CPD library. If you're still a student, we've made it available for you as well, and you can get that in the Counselor Study Resource. If you're not a member of the CPD library or the Counselor CPD or Counselor Study Resource, make your way to counsellingtutor.com. All the information is right there on the home page. And this has been episode 246 of the Counselling Tutor Podcast.
Yeah, so we started off with theory and practice, talking about Petruska Clarkson's 5 relationship model. It speaks to transpersonal and intersubjective relationships. We moved on to practice partner, where we explored and examined how we advertise and the different mediums we can advertise in. And finally, in practice matters, I interviewed Dr. Dwight Turner and his lecture, Working with Otherness. And as always, stay grounded and stay safe.
Take the stress out of your counselling studies and get the support of Rory and I by joining us in the Counselling Study Resource. See how Counselling Study Resource can help you. Visit counsellingtutor.com. That's counsellingtutor.com.
Thank you for listening to the Counselling Tutor Podcast. Find the show notes for this episode on our website at www.counsellingtutor.com.